Night fell heavily over Interstate 70 in the heart of Missouri. It was one of those winter nights when the sky looked like a black, starless curtain, and the cutting wind slipped through any open crack. John Matthews, a 42-year-old truck driver, was driving his silver Kenworth loaded with agricultural equipment towards Kansas City. Beside him, in the passenger seat, slept his loyal companion, Max, a brown and black German shepherd who had accompanied him on every trip for the past 6 years. John had left St. Louis 3 hours earlier, and the monotony of the empty road was beginning to weigh on his eyelids. He knew that stretch like the back of his hand, mile after mile of asphalt surrounded by empty fields and a few scattered farms. During the day, the landscape had a certain rural beauty. At night, it was simply an intimidating void. Max lifted his head, ears pricked.
His animal instinct sensed something John had not yet noticed. The dog began to shift uneasily, a low growl escaping his throat. "Easy, boy," John murmured, patting the dog without taking his eyes off the road. "It's just the wind." But it wasn't just the wind. Ahead, a dark shape lay across the road. John saw it too late. It was a massive tree branch, likely torn from a tree by the storm that had passed through earlier. He jerked the steering wheel to the right, trying to avoid it, but the weight of the load and the speed worked against him. The truck skidded. John felt the steering wheel lock in his hands. Everything happened in slow motion, and yet too fast to process. The world spun. The sound of twisting metal exploded in his ears. Max was thrown against the dashboard. John felt his body slam violently into the seatbelt. And then, darkness. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hiss of the truck's engine and the distant sound of wind howling across the fields. The Kenworth had left the road, partially rolled over, and come to rest on its side in a deep ditch about 50 meters into a plowed field. In the pitch-black, moonless night, the vehicle was nearly invisible from the highway. Max regained consciousness first. His head throbbed, and he tasted metal in his mouth. The dog struggled to his feet, disoriented, his paws slipping on the tilted upholstery of the cab. Something was terribly wrong. The world was crooked. He sniffed the air, searching for his owner. John was unconscious, suspended at an odd angle by the seatbelt. Blood streamed from a deep cut on his forehead. His breathing was shallow, barely noticeable. Max barked. Once, twice, 3 times. His bark echoed inside the crashed cab, but John didn't move. The dog moved closer, licking his owner's face, nudging him gently with his nose. Nothing. Only that faint breathing and the smell of blood, which made Max increasingly agitated. For 6 years, Max had lived by John's side. Since he was a puppy, he had known only 2 things with absolute certainty. John was his world, and John always took care of him. When he was hungry, John fed him. When he was thirsty, John gave him water. When he was tired, John stroked his head until he fell asleep. And now, John needed him. Max tried again to wake his owner, but it was useless. He sniffed around the cab, searching for an exit. The driver's door was crushed shut, impossible to open. But on the passenger side, the window had shattered on impact. There was enough space. Carefully, Max squeezed through the opening, lightly cutting his paw on a piece of glass. He barely felt the pain. He dropped onto the frozen ground outside and immediately lifted his nose, sniffing the night air. The wind carried the smell of wet earth, dry plants, and something else, far away, the scent of people, food, gasoline. Max looked back at the truck cab where John lay motionless. Every fiber of his animal being screamed at him to stay, not to abandon his owner. But a deeper instinct, something beyond training or canine logic, told him he had to go. He had to find help. The dog barked one last time at the wrecked truck, as if making a promise, and then he ran. Interstate 70 was a dark line cutting through the landscape. Max ran along the shoulder, his paws striking the frozen asphalt in a steady rhythm. The wind hurled dirt and small debris into his face, but he kept going, guided by that distant scent of civilization. Occasionally, a car sped past, its headlights piercing the darkness for a brief moment before disappearing again. Once, Max ran toward the middle of the road, barking desperately at an approaching sedan, but the driver merely swerved around him with an irritated honk and drove on. To that person, it was just another stray dog on the highway, one more of the many abandoned animals wandering America's roads. The German shepherd kept running. His injured paw left small spots of blood on the asphalt, but adrenaline pushed the pain aside. He had already covered 3 kilometers when he began to limp slightly. His lungs burned from the cold night air. But in Max's simple, focused mind, there was only one thought: find help for John. Up ahead, lights. Faint at first, just a pale glow on the black horizon. But as Max drew closer, they became clearer. Artificial lights, bright, welcoming. A gas station. The Riverside truck stop was one of those places that served as an oasis for truckers in the vastness of America's highways.
Fuel pumps, a convenience store, a small diner serving coffee 24 hours a day, and a wide parking lot where drivers could rest. On that Tuesday night, business was slow. Only 2 trucks parked and 1 car at the pumps. Sarah Chen was working the night shift. At 28, she had been a clerk at the truck stop for 3 years, saving money to return to college and finish her nursing degree. Nights were usually quiet, giving her time to study between customers. She was behind the counter, reviewing her anatomy notes, when she heard the barking. Loud, insistent, desperate. Sarah looked up and saw, through the glass window, a furry shape running toward the station. A large dog, panting, clearly distressed. Max reached the entrance and stopped, barking non-stop. His almond-shaped eyes locked onto Sarah through the glass. He scratched at the door with his paws, leaving streaks of mud and blood. His bark wasn't aggressive. It was a cry for help. Sarah stepped from behind the counter and cautiously opened the door. The dog immediately nudged her with his nose, then ran a few meters toward the road, stopped, looked back, and barked again. He ran back to Sarah, gently grabbed the hem of her pants, and tugged, as if trying to pull her along. Hey, easy boy," Sarah said, kneeling beside him. That's when she noticed the collar with an ID tag. She turned it toward the light. Max, if found, called John Matthews, followed by a phone number. The dog continued pacing, looking toward the dark road and then back at Sarah. His behavior was unmistakable to anyone who had seen viral videos or heard stories like this before, an animal trying to communicate an emergency. "Max, are you trying to show me something?" Sarah asked, even though she knew he couldn't answer. But the answer was in his eyes, in his frantic movements. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number on the tag. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hello, you've reached John Matthews. Leave your message." The recorded voice sounded cheerful, carefree. Sarah left a quick message explaining the situation and hung up. Inside the station, a truck driver was drinking coffee. Thomas Burke, about 50 years old, with a gray beard and kind eyes. He had been watching the scene through the window with growing interest. "This dog is trying to tell you something, girl," Thomas said as he stepped outside the station, still holding his coffee mug. He crouched beside Max, examining him with an experienced eye. "Look at his paw. It's bleeding. And look how he keeps staring in that direction. Something happened." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "Do you think his owner is in trouble?" "I'd bet my truck on it," Thomas replied. "I've seen behavior like this before." Years ago, a shepherd dog led some farmers to a child who had fallen into a well. These animals are smarter than we think. Max barked again, louder this time, and started running toward the road. He stopped about 10 meters away, looked back, and barked again. "He wants us to follow him," Sarah said, urgency rising in her voice. She looked at Thomas. "But I can't leave the station. I'm alone on shift." Thomas was already moving toward his truck. "I'll go. You stay here and call emergency services. Tell them there may be an accident on I-70, westbound from here. I'll follow the dog and see what I find." Sarah rushed back inside and dialed 911 while Thomas started his Peterbilt.
Seeing the truck move, Max began running alongside it, barking and guiding the way. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm at the Riverside truck stop on I-70. A dog just showed up here in clear distress. He's injured and trying to lead people somewhere along the highway. We believe there may be an accident. There was a pause. Ma'am, are you saying a dog reported an accident? I know how that sounds, Sarah said, trying to stay calm, but the animal is clearly trying to communicate something. Please send an ambulance and police. A truck driver is following the dog westbound on I-70 right now. Understood. Units are being dispatched. Please stay on the line. Meanwhile, on the dark highway, Thomas drove slowly, with Max running ahead in the headlights. The dog occasionally looked back to make sure he was being followed, then continued at his determined pace. 3 kilometers later, Max stopped abruptly. He left the roadway, ran down the embankment, and began barking toward the dark field. Thomas pulled over, grabbed his powerful flashlight from the glove compartment, and climbed out. The beam of light swept across the field, and about 50 meters from the road, Thomas saw something that made his heart race. The reflection of metal. An overturned truck. My God, Thomas whispered. He called 911 as he ran toward the wreck, Max racing beside him. The Kenworth's cab was partially crushed, but Thomas reached the shattered window and shined his flashlight inside. John was still strapped in by the seatbelt, unconscious and bleeding. Hey, can you hear me? Thomas shouted, reaching inside to check John's pulse. It was weak, but it was there. Hang in there, buddy. Help is coming. Max climbed back into the cab the same way he had escaped hours earlier. He pressed himself against John, licking his face and whimpering softly. It was as if he could finally relax, knowing he had completed his mission. He had found help. 911, this is Thomas Burke. I'm on I-70, about 3 kilometers west of the Riverside truck stop.
There's a truck overturned in a field about 50 meters south of the highway. Driver trapped in the cab, unconscious, severe head injuries. I need an ambulance and firefighters now. Units are already en route, sir. Are you able to access the victim? I'll try. The door was too crushed to open, but Thomas reached through the broken window and carefully released the seatbelt, supporting John's head and upper body. John groaned faintly, the first sign of consciousness since the crash. That's it. Stay with me, Thomas encouraged. You've been in an accident, but we're getting you out of here. Sirens approached. First, a state highway patrol cruiser arrived, its red and blue lights washing the field in surreal colors. Officer Richards jumped out and ran toward the wreck. Minutes later, an ambulance and a fire truck arrived.
The rescue team worked with practiced efficiency. Paramedics assessed John, while firefighters used hydraulic tools to open the cab door. Max was gently removed from the truck, but he refused to go far. He sat just a few meters away, eyes fixed on every movement made around his owner. We've got head trauma, possible rib fractures, low blood pressure, paramedic Jenny Wilson reported. We need to move him now. They placed John on a stretcher with a cervical collar and loaded him into the ambulance. Max immediately tried to follow. Hey boy, you can't come in, Jenny said, tears forming in her eyes as she looked at the exhausted, injured dog. You did your job. You saved him. I'll take the dog, Thomas offered. I'll get him to a vet and track down the family. But Max refused to leave.
When the ambulance began to pull away, he barked desperately and tried to run after it. His legs finally gave out, and he stumbled, collapsing on the cold ground, still trying to get up. Officer Richards stopped what he was doing. A former soldier who had worked with search and rescue dogs, he recognized loyalty when he saw it. "Jenny," he called. "Wait a minute." He approached her and said quietly, "That dog walked miles to save this man. Let him ride in the ambulance. I'll take responsibility." Jenny glanced at her partner, Dave, who shrugged. "I think we've got room," he said with a small smile. "Max," Richards called. "Come on, boy. You're going with him." Max didn't hesitate. He climbed into the ambulance with the last of his strength and lay down beside John's stretcher, resting his muzzle on his owner's lifeless hand. The ambulance tore through the night at high speed, siren wailing, lights flashing. Inside, Jenny worked quickly to stabilize John.
She monitored his vital signs, administered IV fluids, and kept his airway clear. Max never took his eyes on John's face. When the monitors began beeping faster, signaling a drop in blood pressure, the dog lifted his head, anxious. "He's going to be okay, boy," Jenny said, even though she couldn't be completely sure. John had lost a lot of blood, and there was no way to know the extent of the internal injuries until they reached the hospital. "You did everything right. You went for help. You saved his life." At Mercy Hospital in Columbia, Missouri, the trauma team was ready when the ambulance arrived. John was rushed into the emergency room while Max was gently restrained by a security guard. The dog whimpered, trying to follow, but it was clear he couldn't go any farther. That's when a nurse on duty, Margaret Hughes, gray-haired with kind eyes, approached. She had heard the story over the ambulance radio. "Is this the dog?" she asked, kneeling beside Max.
The German shepherd looked at her with tired eyes, and Margaret felt her heart break. "You're a good boy. A very good boy." She stroked his head and noticed the injured paw, the scratches on his muzzle, the dried blood in his fur. "We're going to take care of you too." Margaret led Max to a private waiting area, brought him water and food, and called the on-call veterinarian. Dr. Reeves arrived 20 minutes later and treated Max's injuries. Nothing serious, just superficial cuts and extreme exhaustion. What Max needed most was rest. Meanwhile, in the operating room, a team of doctors fought to save John Matthews. The lead surgeon, Dr. Patrick Chen, assessed the damage: a skull fracture, 3 broken ribs, and a liver laceration. Serious, but operable. This man was lucky, Dr. Chen said to his team. If he had stayed out there another hour, especially in that cold, he probably wouldn't have survived. The surgery lasted 3 hours.
When it was over, John was transferred to the ICU, still unconscious but stable. Margaret convinced security to let Max wait in the hallway near the ICU. The dog lay on a blanket she had found, but he didn't sleep. His eyes stayed open, watchful, waiting for any sign of his owner. Margaret was the one who finally located John's family. His wallet had arrived with his personal belongings. Inside was a worn photo of a woman and a young boy, with a phone number written on the back. She called it. "Hello?" A sleepy female voice answered. It was 3 in the morning. "My name is Margaret Hughes. I'm a nurse at Mercy Hospital in Columbia. I'm trying to reach the family of John Matthews." There was a pause. Then fear filled the woman's voice. "John? I'm Lisa, his ex-wife. What happened? Is he okay?" Margaret explained gently. Lisa listened in silence, then said, "My son and I are coming right now." "And Max? How is Max?" "Max is here," Margaret said softly, "and he refuses to leave. He saved your ex-husband's life. He walked miles through the darkness to get help." Lisa arrived before dawn with Kyle, their 12-year-old son. The first thing Kyle asked was, "Where's Max?" Margaret led them to the hallway. When Max saw Kyle, his tail wagged weakly, the first time since the accident. The boy knelt and hugged the dog, tears streaming down his face. "Good boy, Max," Kyle whispered. "You saved my dad. You're a hero." Lisa stood nearby, crying quietly. She and John had been divorced for 3 years, but still cared deeply for one another. John woke up 2 days later. The first thing he saw was a white ceiling and harsh fluorescent lights. His head throbbed with a dull pain. "Where?" he croaked. "Easy," Lisa said, taking his hand. "You're in the hospital. You were in an accident." Memories returned slowly. The road, the branch, losing control. "Max," John said suddenly. "Where's Max?" "He's okay," Lisa said gently. "John, he saved you. He walked miles to a gas station and brought help back." John stared at her. "What?" She told him everything. "He's still here?" John asked, voice breaking. "Yes. The nurses are hiding him in a storage room. Technically not allowed, but no one had the heart to send the hero away. I need to see him." Minutes later, Margaret brought Max into the ICU room on an improvised leash. The dog immediately pulled toward the bed. When Max reached John, he placed his front paws on the mattress and licked his face nonstop. "Hey, boy," John whispered, stroking Max's ears. "I hear you're a hero." Max pressed his head into John's hand, whimpering softly. The story spread quickly,
Local news first, then national. German Shepherd walks miles to save owner after truck crash filled headlines. Sarah Chen and Thomas Burke gave interviews.
Officer Richard shared how Max insisted on riding in the ambulance. When John finally spoke to reporters, he said simply, "I owe my life to him. He didn't abandon me. Even hurt, even scared, he went for help. That's love." John decided not to return to long-haul trucking. He chose family. He chose home. 2 months later, John was fully recovered. He sold his truck and took a local logistics job. No more long nights on the road. Every evening, he was home with Kyle and Max. Max became a local celebrity, but to him, none of that mattered. What mattered was that John was safe. That fall, the American Kennel Club honored Max as Hero Dog of the Year in New York. When John accepted the award, Max simply licked his face. "This isn't just about Max," John said. "It's about what all dogs give us every day, unconditional love." 5 years later, life was calm. Kyle was preparing for college. John managed a logistics company.
Max was older now, slower, gray around the muzzle, but still loyal. One afternoon, under an oak tree in the backyard, John sat beside Max and Kyle. "Do you regret leaving the road?" Kyle asked. John smiled. "No. Max didn't just save my life. He showed me what really matters." Max lay between them, head resting on John's lap. And every night before bed, John whispered the same words. "Thank you, boy. Thank you for not giving up on me." Because home is not a place. Home is where those who love us are waiting.